I'm joined by R. Gopalakrishnan, former Executive Director of Tata Sons Limited, somebody who knew Mr. Tata very well. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before anything, your first thoughts and your first few memories of Mr. Tata.
Well, my memories of Mr. Tata stretch over 25 years, and they really focus upon the human being more than the manager. Ratan Tata was rich with human qualities, and those lead to very effective relationships in any organization, any business or non-business organization. He displayed in great strength, kindness, generosity, respect for other people, what in Urdu they would call ibadat, inayat and insaniyat. And that is not common, because most business leaders whom one might meet are very self-assured, they talk very well, articulate, and they have been trained to be confident. Mr. Ratan Tata was great strength and great weakness. He was himself.
You know, that's an interesting phrase to describe him and perhaps his legacy as well. Inayat, Insaniyat, and Ibadat. Could you, for those of us who probably do not understand what those words mean, describe what you mean by that?
You know, Insaniyat is about being fair in your relationships. Inayat is being kind and humane in your relationships. And Ibadat is being respectful. So if I take the simple explanations without getting into the fine aspects, it is being fair, kind, and respectful. That's what.
Right.
They all three start with I, and they sound very nice. I've just adopted it.
Right. Also, the article that you recently penned down, in that article, you mentioned that, unlike his predecessors, or four of them who held the Tata Group from 1868 to 1992, they all died abroad, while Mr. Tata breathed his last in Mumbai. How would you describe his relationship with the city? Because we've been watching throughout the day at NPCL launch first, and then after that at Worli Crematorium, a massive crowd of the who's who, and of course everybody and anybody who knew Mr. Tata, which perhaps includes the entire country. I mean, there were just so many people there.
Because he was such a good human being, even those who never met him connected with him. I mean, I can take a guess and say that of all the people who stood in the queues today, maybe 80% have never met him. And maybe another 15% have met him casually or seen him from a distance. Maybe only 5% have interacted with him. And of that 5, maybe 2% have really interacted with him in any detail. That shows the measure of what corporates would really love to have but struggle to have. Every corporate likes to be respected. It also likes to be loved. But if I ask anybody, as I've done very often in the past, tell me the name of 5 companies whom you respect and love, they struggle. I say, tell me the names of companies you respect. They're able to name 10. So to love a company is a very unusual attribute. And it's not just a leader, you love the company. If Tata gets into trouble, people reach out for it. When the terror attack happened in the Taj, the number of letters we got from people saying, I'm not very wealthy, but I want to send a check for 25,000 rupees for you to reconstruct the Taj. That's sort of love. And I think the distinctive factor of Tata, right from the time of the founder, by the way, I wrote this book recently called Jamshedji Tata, Powerful Lessons for Corporate Leaders. And one of the things that I found very interesting and caused me to write the book is that this has been a characteristic of a Tata leader right from then, for 6 generations. I don't think any Tata leader has been in place who was not respected and loved. And Ratan Tata, of course, took that tradition. I don't know if it's to a new high, but certainly he flew it at a very high level.
Loved and respected. An ambitious businessman who was firm when he needed to be. At least that's what comes out based on your article. He was firm when he needed to be. You talk about a few instances where he was that, but at the same time, he was a very mild mannered man. Could you talk to us about a few of those anecdotes? Could you tell us about some of those stories? Because you, of course, worked with him for more than 2.5 decades. So I'm sure you have a whole bag of such stories.
Yeah, we tend to mistake in our normal interactions uh, what the leader looks like with what he is. And very often they are at variance, either because people behave differently from the way they really think, and they do that deliberately, or because there is a natural distortion that happens when something moves from the head to behavior. Uh, Ratan Tata was apparently soft spoken. He would come through as apparently low profile. He would come through as apparently uh, accommodating, and people would translate this to his total persona. But deep within himself, at least it was my experience, I don't know if anybody else would agree, he was a very strong man with very strong views. At the same time, he had eclectic quality. The eclectic quality being what I call a beginner's mindset. He could come into a discussion with his mind quite open. Whereas most of us have worked in organizations and continue to work in organizations where the boss man is supposed to have read all the papers, got clarity in his head, and he's come with a decision sitting in his head to be delivered. I don't think he came that way to meetings. He came that way to meetings saying, okay, the subject has been laid out, let's hear what everybody else has to say, and let's arrive at a conclusion. And this is the remarkable uh, aspect of it. I mean, one good example is in Tata Steel, where I was not directly involved, but I know the facts that when they had to modernize back in 1991-92, one of how much new equipment you required, what new technology you required, how much capital expenditure you required, how much cash you required, all that was pretty clear. But they had to reduce the workforce from 95,000 to over 40,000. And everybody said that's going to be the showstopper. Tata has never done it, it's not the Tata way. He said, well, the Tata way is to keep the company going. Let's apply our mind as to how to reduce it without too much pain to people. And I think in what is one of the most remarkable in my 50-year career I have not come across. So-called downsizing, to use a word, but a downsizing done with humanity. The Tata Steel sales force workforce came down from 90,000 to about 40,000. Now it might have gone up again, but I'm talking of that particular aspect. So he had a sense of steel inside कि जो सही है वही करना है, and करने के लिए क्या रास्ता निकाले वो हमारा काम.
Right. Let's talk about that for a little while. His position when he joined in 62, the Tata Group, and within a decade of that, he was at the helm of affairs, and by 1992 he had taken over. So talk to us for a little while about those years, because despite the heft that his surname carried, his journey was not really a cakewalk. So if you could throw some light on what his journey was like, because you worked in close quarters with him.
I have to tell you, I wasn't in Tata's at that time. I was in Hindustan Lever. So whatever I'm telling you, I've only heard from him. And so it is second hand. If you really want to know what actually he was like when he was 1970, you have to talk to somebody else who's probably, many of them are dead and gone now.
No, from his days. I mean, I just went back to it because I wanted to give viewers a reference. That 62 is when he joined the group, fresh out of Cornell. And
So, Ratan Tata was probably a reluctant returnee, as I have been told by him, because he was very happy in Cornell. He was studying architecture and engineering. But his grandmother, to whom he was very close, Nawaz Bai, who was the wife of Sir Ratan Tata, his grandfather, wanted him to come back, and he came back. And initially, I mean, you have to think back to those years, 60s and 70s, when India was a more hierarchical society, and there were very accomplished leaders in the Tata Group, as with many other companies. And he was therefore put to, really work at the operational level. And he might have perceived that as his surname being a disadvantage. But in Hindustan, even they say we put you through the ringers. We ask you to work as a salesman. We ask you to work as a factory operator. They did the equivalent of that to him. And then as he grew, um, it was not a given that a Tata would succeed, because don't forget, they're not sort of rich with sons and sons taking over father's roles. After the founder Jamshedji Tata, the next was his son Dorabji Tata. After Dorabji Tata came a second cousin, which is Nauroji Saklatwala, and after him yet another second cousin, which is J.R.D. Tata, and now back to uh, Ratan Tata. So, although they all have the same surname, they are not from a common single lineage, as with most Indian business families. And I think what he inherited was the principle that Tata's runs on human values and not Zoroastrian values or Hindu values or Muslim values. And that's what he observed. And right till the very end, he would always express the view that I don't see why it should be compulsory to have a Parsi or a particular community, because the best man wins, so long as he exhibits the right human values. And that's the way Tata has operated for 140 years, and he did not change it either.
Also, he did not marry. So, the next generation, the next set of leaders who will come after him, of course, as you were mentioning, as it has not been the case with the Tata Group, perhaps, that will continue.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he doesn't have a Tata progeny is besides the point. His half brother Noel does have Tata progeny.
Yes.
I've even met a Tamil lady whose name was Shamala Tata. So, yeah, absolutely nothing to do with this family, but she is called Shamala Tata. So, I don't think the Tata surname itself is very important. It's an unusual surname. But then there are people in Andhra who are called Tata Rao. They have nothing to do with Tatas or being Parsi. So,
Right.
I think the fixation here should be on the merit and not on the surname.
Right. We will talk about his legacy a little later, but before that, I wanted to talk to you about, did you manage to have a word with him after Air India came back to the Tata fold?
Not directly with him. The last I met him was on 29th of July, which was JRD's birth anniversary, which was celebrated as a corporate function. And he was not in good shape for the last 2-3 years, frankly. I have never engaged with him on any long conversation in the last 3-4 years. So I have not talked to him about Air India, but I've certainly talked to people like Chandra, who's the current chair,
Right.
who know that it's a damn tough job, but who decided as an act of love or duty or commercial pride that they're going to do it. And I have no doubt that they will.
Right. And I think the phrase that you used in your article, I mean, we talked about it a little bit. I asked you to explain it to us, of course, Inayat, Insaniyat, and Ibadat, because his life, philanthropy was also a big element, whether it's the hospital for animals or the cancer specialty hospital. He was heavily involved, but never really talked about, his philanthropic endeavors. So if you could for a little bit talk to us about what drove him to sort of avoid the limelight, so to speak, especially when it came to his philanthropic efforts.
Well, to be honest, he wanted to avoid the limelight for all his activities. He was not a limelight type. Who would want to be photographed? You would have never seen his picture on page 3. Perhaps by accident once in a while with somebody else. He was never the kind of guy who wanted people to notice him. However, in later years, people did notice him and notice him for who he is rather than his own showmanship. Philanthropy is a given in Tata's. In this book that I've written with Harish Bhatt, we have brought out how the fundamental purpose of the corporation is defined by the founder, and it set the community center stage. It is center stage, not the shareholder who center stage. And I remember when I joined Tata's in 1998, as I traveled to get familiar with the business and the various units all over the country, uh, there would always be some picture, some chart, some statement to the effect that ask yourself three questions before any investment. Is it good for India? Is it good for the community? Is it good for Tata shareholder? I mean, it's exactly the opposite of what you might find in any other company. So now, if you're going into chips, it is not a given that you'll make oodles of money in chips. It may take a long time before you make. It's not a given that you'll make oodles of money in Air India. It may take a long time. But is it good for the country? Is it good for the community? Can Tata make it? And if you say yes, I think so, then you give yourself the runway before that profit plane takes off. And that is the remarkable thing about Tata's is that there's no other corporation in the world which is in so many domains successful. I mean, if you go to US, you'll find a biography of Andrew Carnegie for steel, for Thomas Edison for electricity, Thomas Watson for information processing, Joan Tripp for airlines, uh, Hilton for hotels, and so on and so forth, right up to Bob Noyce for microchips. But here, everything is being done by one group, and that is unusual. It comes out of the very unusual structure, in my opinion. This is a personal opinion, that the parent company is private and the operating companies are listed. Whereas in the rest of the world, it's always the other way around. The parent company is listed and the operating company is private. So by reversing it, I'm not sure there was any great design or plan in it. You're able to hold values together in the group. And that is something which we've written about in the book. I want to spend time on that in this video.
Right, right. Things, making decisions, including, of course, decisions regarding Jaguar and Land Rover, and then, of course, the decision about launching Nano. In your personal opinion, which decisions of his would you say that stand out in your mind in terms of the kind of change that he brought to the group, and now, as you were mentioning, what the group has eventually evolved into?
Well, all his decisions, some of them were successful, or many of them were successful, some of them were unsuccessful. But we learned out of the lack of success and built on it. Take passenger cars as an example. I mean, this company, Telco as it used to be called, Tata Motors, was a diesel locomotive company back in 1945 when Tata's bought it. From diesel locomotive, they went into diesel trucks in collaboration with Mercedes-Benz. Right up until 1980, we were making only diesel engines to put into diesel trucks or trucklets, the small vehicles. People said Tata knows nothing about petrol. And yet we said we learn about petrol engines and we launched the Indica. Indica was not a wild, raging success from day one. It had a number of problems. But then as those got fixed, you learned about petrol engines and you tried Nano. And Nano has not been successful. That's in the public domain. So we put it aside and we carried on with making better petrol cars. And then when the EV time came, we said we'll switch completely to EV. So I think these are all ways in which I'm taking the locomotive automobile example to show how you kept changing as you made mistakes and learned from it. You take telecom, we entered with Tata Teleservices with the CDMA technology. Whether that was the sole reason or one of the key reasons, we were not successful. And we took a hit and got out of telecom. But that left us with broadband and enterprise services, which Tata Communications, which used to be the form of BSNL, is now pursuing. So I think he took many bold bets, going globalization. I mean, nobody would have thought India can go global, whether it's Tetley or British Steel or Chorus or soda ash in the US. Each of them was a step you took forward. You made a few mistakes and then you built on it. Some of them are still mistakes to be resolved, but that's where Tata comes in. It's got a very long term view because the fundamental belief of Tata is not in the financial valuation of the company, but in the perpetual valuation of the company. Are you building something for the next 20, 30, 40 years? That's what's driving Tata. Not will I get my cash back in 5 years.
Right, right. And what do you think can be a fitting farewell to the man? Also, who do you think will take his legacy forward?
Well, Chandra and his colleagues will definitely take it forward because that's part of the DNA. You don't need a Tata to take it forward.
Right.
So I don't see that this surname related, it is values related. And people who have spent time in the group, who have been soaked in, who have been marinated within the juice of Tata. And there are, in the book we have described how Tata really gets people into the group and the way the group is thinking. Remember, Tata has about 750,000 employees.
Yes.
If I add employees who moved on from Tata in the last, say, 5 years, you get a total population of 3 million. And if I multiply that by 4 to say there are 4 people per family, that's about 12 million people. And people who leave Tata may leave for career reasons, location reasons, job reasons, but they love Tata still. It's unbelievable. I mean, there'll always be a few bitching here and there, but that apart, people still think very highly of Tata. And there's a bond that's created. It's like army people or railway people. I'm a railway kid, and my dad was in the railways, your dad was in the railways, so a bond comes automatically. Army, Navy. So Tata is a bit like that. It's a way of life, and I like to call it the Tata way.
The Tata way. Of course, that's one name which is known to everybody, and also the legacy of that name and what that name stands for. Whether you're talking to somebody in a boardroom or you're talking to somebody in the street, chances are that person has heard of the brand, knows the brand, and uses the brand name not just to refer to the products of the brand, but also in day-to-day conversations, for all sorts of, to describe all sorts of things, things which can be relied upon, things which can be trusted. Thank you so much, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, for taking out the time and talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best to you. Good luck.